Null is C#'s concept of nothing. If you create a variable without giving it a value, it will often have a value of null. To begin, open the My Project sample file from your sample files folder. And open the code behind file of calculator.aspx. We are now going to add a null string. To do this, add the following code to the page load event handler. String null string string empty string equals an empty set of inverted commas. Next, set a breakpoint at the end of the page load event handler. You learned how to do this in Lesson 3.3. Now run the page in Debug Mode. You learned how to do this in Lesson 1.8. When the page loads, it is paused at the breakpoint, and you are returned to the code editor. Now check the values of the null string and empty string variables. To do this, simply hover your mouse cursor over their names. As you can see, null string has a value of null, while empty string has an empty string instead of null. The distinction between null and an empty string is an important one. You can perform all string methods on an empty string, but many methods would cause an exception if you tried to use them with a null string. If you tried to set the text property of a label control to null, for example, it would cause an exception. Stop debugging now. Note that if you look at the IntelliSense menu for string, by typing string dot, amongst the methods you'll see a method called isNullOrEmpty, which returns a bool. IsNullOrEmpty is useful when you want to find out if a string is null or empty without having to check for both conditions. You'll learn about checking conditions in Lesson 7.1. We are now going to add a null int. To do this, add the following code to the end of the page load event handler. Int null int. Run the page in debug mode and check the value of null int when the code pauses. As you can see, rather than being null, the value is 0. This is because int isn't nullable by default. A normal int variable can never have a null value, and most of the time that's exactly what you want. If you were to try to set null int to null by using null int equals null, you would cause an error. Stop debugging now. There are times when you want an int or other non-nullable variable to contain a null value, especially when working with databases, as you'll discover in Lesson 12.6. Fortunately, it's very easy to make a variable nullable. Add a question mark after the word int. Putting the question mark after int makes it nullable. You can do this with other non-nullable types. For example, double question mark and datetime question mark would create nullable versions of those types. You can't create a string ? Because string is already nullable. Run the page in debug mode once more, and check the value of null int. As you can see, this time null int has a null value. Stop debugging. Remove all code from the page load event handler. And remove the breakpoint. You've now completed Lesson 5.12. Understand null.